Greetings, church. It's April 2nd, and I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and reflect on a few things with you. First of all, I trust that you received the communication we sent out a couple of days ago, communicating that we will be continuing the suspension of our in-person services through the month of April, in keeping with both the federal and state government's guidelines. We're super grieved by that. Uh, I miss being with you in person, and I know that you all miss being together. We're so grateful for things like Zoom and FaceTime and even the ability to live stream aspects of worship. But we recognize that this is not a replacement for the physical gathering of the church. And this is not what God intended for us. And I am praying, and I trust that you are too, that God will shorten these days that we have to be apart. But as I think about that, I reflect on this last few weeks and the last few years, even, and how God has been so gracious to prepare us. He's been faithful in leading us into scriptures that have reminded us that suffering is real. Even as you go back to our time in First Peter, you recall that suffering was a recurring theme of that book. We know that we live in a world that is broken. We live in a world that is under the curse of sin and death, and death reigns. And so it's not a surprise when things like viruses can take hold and wreak great havoc. But God is faithful, and He's faithful not only in preserving us, but in giving us the means whereby He preserves us. And so He's revealed Himself to us, and He's told us how to believe and think in times like this. I want to say that I know for many of us, these are hard times, but I think that there's every reason to believe that they're going to get harder. I know that that's difficult to think about, and I certainly don't want to be discouraging in any way. And yet, I think that if we look at places like New York City, we recognize that today things are much more difficult than they were just a few days ago, and they're likely to get more difficult. Our government officials have been telling us that things are likely to get more difficult. As I've thought about that, I'm probably never been more glad to be in flyover country and recognize that the intensity with which we suffer here may be less than other areas of the country, and yet that doesn't that doesn't necessarily mean that we are not going to endure significant hardship together. So really the question is, how do we prepare for that? And how are you preparing for that? The Lord counsels us to prepare. Imagine if we knew that there was a winter storm coming and you didn't bring along your coat or your boots or your gloves. You wouldn't be prepared. And yet, if you do bring your coat and your gloves and your boots, you're better prepared to weather that storm. In the same way, we can look ahead and we can see a forecast and we can recognize that it's likely to get stormy. And so, what are we doing to prepare? The Lord has encouraged us to deepen our understanding of who He is, deepen our understanding of His character, deepen our understanding of His nature. And that by doing that, He gives us an ability to lay hold of Him and lay hold of truth concerning Him, and even truth concerning the gospel, and how through His character we have amazing hope. And that helps us. That's what strengthens our soul through difficult times. So I want to ask you, how are you preparing? Are you preparing? One of the things I've been encouraging us to do is to meditate upon the various characteristics of God. Last week we talked about God's supremacy and His sovereignty and His infinite wisdom. We talked about His glory. We talked about the transcendence of God and His immanence or nearness to us. And these are important things. There's so much more that we could be thinking about. Are you? Are you processing those things? Are you thinking about those things? A few years ago, I took some time and to help me process through this and help me have an opportunity to meditate. I took 3x5 cards like this, and I wrote the character quality of God across the top of the card, and then just a definition of that character quality, and then scripture references that spoke to that quality. And that gave me the ability to think about those things. It was helpful even working through that process. And then on the back side of the card, I took time to draw implications of that character quality. And those implications were different then than they would probably be today. But I can take that quality and think about, how does this work itself out in my life? How does it work itself out in difficulty? The more I understand the infinite wisdom of God, the more I can apply that truth to the circumstances that I'm in. Years ago, before modern medicine, people would use oil to rub into a wound to soften the wound so that it would have a better chance of healing. The truths of God, the truths of the gospel, are kind of like that oil. The more equipped you are with it, the better you're able to rub that into those areas that hurt and obtain healing. So I would encourage you to go through some type of an exercise where you are thinking about the character of God, thinking about the gospel of God, thinking about his love, his mercy, his kindness, his faithfulness. And if you want to put them down in a 3x5 card like I did, great. Maybe you'll have some other way of doing that. For me, it's been helpful to have a stack of those by my bed at night. I can reach over and grab one, and before I go to sleep, read it, and then go to sleep thinking about that. I've also had them down here at the office or in my Bible. But whatever you do, I would so encourage you to take time to prepare. Take time to be thinking about these things so that when difficulties come or as they intensify, that you will have something to lay hold of to strengthen your soul. Praying for you and continuing to think of you, and so look forward to the time when we can gather again together as the church in the way that God intended it. So God bless you, and we'll be back again soon.